Hello there, seeker of silence. If these quiet stories bring you peace, feel free to subscribe, so there is always another tale waiting for you when the night grows long. Tonight, we walk a path few remember clearly, one that winds high into the cold spine of the mountains, where stone towers stand against the wind, and time moves differently among the broken walls of Kaer Morhen. There was once a witcher who returned there long after his strength had begun to fade. He did not come for contracts nor for coin. He came because memory, like the mountain wind, has a way of calling a man back to where he was shaped. His name had been spoken in many towns once, though few said it kindly. Yet here, in the quiet halls of the keep, names carried little weight. The stones did not care for reputation. They only remembered footsteps. The witcher climbed the final path as dusk stretched across the ridges. Snow rested in narrow pockets along the edges of the trail, untouched where the sun had not reached. His boots pressed into the frozen ground with a slow, steady rhythm, the sound softened by distance and height. Below him the valleys had already darkened. Above, the towers waited. Kaer Morhen stood as it always had, silent, weathered, and patient. Its walls were cracked in places, its outer structures worn down by years of wind and neglect. Yet there was something enduring in its shape, as though the mountain itself had agreed to hold it in place. The gate, half broken, leaned slightly inward. He passed through without pause. Inside, the courtyard opened before him, wide and empty. Snow gathered along the edges of the stone, leaving the center mostly bare where old training grounds had once been cleared daily by young hands. He stopped there for a moment, not out of hesitation, but recognition. There had been voices once. Sharp commands, the sound of wooden blades striking against one another, the occasional stumble followed by a harsh correction. Now there was only the wind, moving through the open spaces, brushing lightly across the stone, as if tracing something long gone. The witcher moved toward the inner halls. The door resisted at first, its hinges stiff with disuse, but it gave way with a low creak that echoed briefly before settling again into stillness. Inside, the air held a different weight. Cool but not biting. Still but not empty. The long corridor stretched ahead, lit only by what little light slipped through narrow windows set high into the walls. Dust rested along the floor in thin layers, disturbed now by his passing. He walked slowly, not because he needed to, but because the place demanded it. Each step seemed to draw something from the past. A shift in the light, a faint memory of movement at the edge of vision. The kind of things one does not question in places like this. He turned into a smaller chamber to his right, the training room, or what remained of it. Wooden posts stood along the walls, some split, others worn smooth from years of repeated strikes. A rack of practice blades leaned against the far corner, their edges dulled, their grips wrapped in old leather that had long since dried and cracked. He approached one of the posts, rested his hand against it. The surface was cold. But beneath that there was something else, an imprint of time, of repetition, of effort. He could almost hear it again. The rhythm of strikes, too slow, too wide, again. The voice had always been firm, never raised but never forgiving. A boy had stood there once, younger than he cared to remember, arms trembling slightly as he held the blade, not from fear, from exhaustion. Again, the command had come without variation, and the boy had obeyed, because there had been no other choice. The witcher withdrew his hand. The memory did not follow him as he stepped back. It remained there where it belonged. He moved deeper into the keep, past the old sleeping quarters, where narrow beds lined the walls in quiet rows, past the long table in the central hall, where meals had once been taken in silence, broken only by the scrape of utensils and the occasional low exchange between those who had earned the right to speak. At the far end of the hall he found what he had been looking for, A small door, unremarkable to most, but not to those who had passed through it. He opened it slowly. The room beyond was dim, its contents difficult to make out at first. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old texts, bottles, instruments whose purpose was not always clear. The air carried a faint trace of something bitter, familiar. This had been the place where boys became something else, or failed trying. The Witcher stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and for the first time since his return he allowed himself to sit. The chair was still where it had always been. He lowered himself into it with care, the wood creaking slightly under the shift of weight. His gaze moved across the room, not searching, remembering. Outside, the wind shifted direction, brushing against the stone walls with a steady, distant sound. Within the room, nothing moved. But the past had a way of settling into places like this, and once stirred, it did not leave quickly. He rested his hands against his knees and began, slowly, to recall the first winter, not the cold, but the lessons, the ones that stayed, and the ones that did not. The mountain had many ways of teaching. Kaer Morhen had more, and not all of them were meant to be survived. The Witcher closed his eyes, not in rest, but in focus, because some memories are easier to face in darkness, and some return whether you call them or not. The first winter had arrived without warning. It always did. One evening, the mountains still held a dull grey calm, the air sharp but manageable. By morning, the world beyond the walls had vanished beneath drifting white. The paths erased, the ridges softened into something deceptive. The boys had been woken before dawn. No explanation, no preparation. Only the sound of boots against stone and the quiet instruction to follow. They had gathered in the courtyard, breath rising in uneven clouds, shoulders tense beneath thin layers of wool. None of them spoke. Not because they had been told not to, but because the cold had a way of taking words before they could form. The Witcher, then still a boy among them, remembered the way the wind moved that morning. Not loud, not forceful, just steady. Enough to remind them that the mountain did not need to prove its strength. Vesemir had stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching them in silence for a long moment. Then he turned and began to walk. No signal was given, no command, but they followed, through the broken gate, out into the snow. The path was barely visible, marked only by shallow dips where stone lay beneath the surface. The first few steps were careful, then less so. One of the boys stumbled early, his foot catching on something hidden beneath the snow. He did not cry out. He stood again, slower this time. They walked for what felt like hours, upward, always upward. The keep disappeared behind them, swallowed by the curve of the mountain. The sky remained pale, offering no sense of time, only distance. Eventually, Vesemir stopped, not at a peak, not at a clearing, but along a narrow stretch of rock where the wind had cleared the snow just enough to reveal the ground beneath. He turned to them. "This," he said, "is where you learn." No further explanation followed. He placed a small bundle on the ground. From it he withdrew several objects, simple tools, a length of rope, a short blade, a flask. Nothing remarkable, nothing that suggested safety. "You will return before nightfall." That was all. Then he stepped back and waited. The boys looked at one another, uncertain. One of them, older, broader than the rest, stepped forward first. He picked up the rope, testing its weight, as though expecting some hidden purpose to reveal itself. None did. Another boy reached for the blade. The Witcher remembered watching them both, not moving, not deciding. Because the mountain had already begun its lesson, the wind shifted, and with it came a fine sweep of snow across the surface of the rock, subtle, but enough to blur the edges of the path they had taken. They had not noticed it at first, not until one of them turned to look behind. There was no clear trail, only a suggestion of one, fading. The older boy spoke then. "We follow back." Simple, direct, and wrong. He took a step in what he believed was the correct direction. Another followed, then another. The Witcher remained where he stood, not from fear, from hesitation. Something in the air felt incomplete, not dangerous, but unfinished. The kind of feeling that lingers when something important has been left unsaid. He looked down at the ground, at the thin layer of snow drifting across the rock, at the faint impressions of their boots already softening. Then he looked toward Vesemir. The old Witcher had not moved. He stood as he had before, watching, waiting. Not for them to succeed, but for them to understand. The Witcher stepped forward, not toward the path, toward the edge of the ridge. The drop below was not steep at first. It sloped downward, uneven, broken by outcroppings and narrow ledges. Snow gathered in deeper pockets there, shaped by the wind into patterns that suggested movement or misdirection. He crouched slightly, studying the surface. There, a difference, barely visible, where the snow had settled differently between the rocks. Not because of the wind, because of weight. Someone had passed that way before, long ago perhaps, or recently. The mountain did not care for time. He reached for the rope, not from the bundle, from the boy who had taken it. "Give it." The boy hesitated, then did, without argument. The Witcher secured one end around a jagged piece of stone, testing it with a firm pull. It held. He did not look back as he began to descend. The cold intensified as he moved lower, the wind shifting direction along the slope, finding new paths between the rocks. His footing was careful, deliberate, each step placed with attention. Above, the others watched, some uncertain, some beginning to understand. One followed, then another, not all. But enough. The Witcher reached a narrow ledge barely wide enough to stand comfortably. From there he could see the lower path more clearly, a winding descent that curved back toward the keep, hidden from the ridge above. He secured the rope again, waited. The others reached him in time, not quickly but steadily. The older boy arrived last. His expression had changed. Not frustration, something quieter, recognition. They continued from there, down the hidden path. The mountain did not make it easy. Loose stones shifted beneath their feet. Snow concealed uneven ground. The wind pressed against them from the side, testing balance, patience, resolve. But the path held, and by the time the light began to fade, the walls of Kaer Morhen appeared again through the drifting white, not welcoming, but present. They crossed the courtyard without a word, entered the keep, and only then did Vesemir speak again. "Again," he said. No explanation, no praise. Just the understanding that the lesson had not been completed, only begun. The Witcher remembered the weight of that word, not heavy, but certain, because the mountain would not change, the path would not become easier, only the ones walking it might. He had learned something that day, not about strength, not about endurance, but about attention, and the quiet ways danger reveals itself, often not where it stands, but where it shifts and fades, and waits for you to follow what seems obvious, instead of what is real. He moved now through the corridor once more, the memory settling back into place as the present returned. Outside, the wind continued its slow passage along the walls, unchanged, as it had been, as it would be. And somewhere beyond the keep, the same mountain paths remained, covered, uncertain, still teaching, in ways that did not require words. The days that followed did not repeat themselves. They resembled one another in shape, perhaps, but never in detail. That was part of the design. Routine at Kaer Morhen was never meant to comfort. It was meant to reveal. The Witcher remembered the third morning after the path in the snow. No wind, no falling snow. The sky stretched pale and open above the courtyard, as though the mountain had chosen for a time to remain still. The boys had gathered again, not called. They had learned to arrive before the call. Vesemir stood near the edge of the training grounds, beside a row of wooden posts. Each post bore the marks of previous lessons, cuts, dents, shallow splinters where strikes had landed poorly. He said nothing at first, only watched. Then he reached for one of the practice blades and placed it upright in the ground. "This is not a weapon," he said. The boys looked at it, then at him. "It is a mistake." He stepped back. "You will learn to see it." No further explanation followed. The Witcher stepped forward with the others. Each took a blade. Each assumed they understood. The first attempts were clumsy. Strikes came too fast, too direct, driven by the instinct to overpower rather than observe. The wooden edges met the posts with hollow sounds, uneven in rhythm, inconsistent in angle. Again. No correction. Again. The Witcher slowed, not out of caution, but because something felt off. The blade in his hand was balanced, too balanced. Its weight did not shift as he moved it. It resisted subtlety, encouraged force. He struck once more, watched the impact. Watched how the blade stopped, not at the post, before it. The contact was shallow, ineffective, a mistake. He adjusted his grip, not tighter, looser. The next movement was slower, less direct. The blade met the post at an angle, sliding slightly upon contact before settling into place. The sound was different, quieter, but deeper. He did not look to Vesemir. He did not need to. The lesson was not in being told. It was in noticing. Beside him, another boy struggled. His strikes grew faster with each failed attempt, frustration guiding his movements rather than awareness. The blade slipped from his hand at one point, landing in the snow with a muted thud. He retrieved it quickly, tried again. The Witcher stepped back, watched. The mistake was not in the blade. It was in the assumption of control. The post did not move. The blade did. The difference mattered. Hours passed, though none of them marked the time. Eventually, Vesemir approached. He took the blade from the struggling boy's hand, held it for a moment, then placed it back into the ground just as before. "This," he said again, "is not a weapon." He gestured toward the post. "It does not fight you." He turned his gaze to the group. "You fight yourselves." Then he stepped away. The lesson ended, or rather, it paused. The Witcher remembered leaving the courtyard that day with a different kind of fatigue, not in his arms, in his thoughts. Because the training at Kaer Morhen did not always teach you how to strike. Sometimes it taught you when not to. He moved now through the inner halls once more, his steps quieter than before. The light had shifted slightly, the narrow windows catching what little remained of the day. Long shadows stretched across the floor, bending around corners, softening the edges of the stone. He passed the training room again, did not enter. Instead, he continued toward a narrower corridor that led deeper into the keep. The air changed there, cooler, heavier, less touched by time. At the end of the corridor, a door stood partially open. He knew this place, not by sight, by feeling. He pushed the door gently. Inside, the room was smaller than the others, more confined. A table stood at its center, marked by faint stains and shallow grooves. Shelves lined the walls, holding remnants of tools and materials once used with careful precision. This had not been a place of movement. It had been a place of waiting, of enduring. The Witcher stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The room held no sound. Not even the wind reached this far. He approached the table, rested his hand upon its surface. The wood was worn smooth in places, rough in others. Time had not erased what had happened here. It had only quieted it. He remembered the first time he had been brought into this room, not alone. None of them had been. They had entered in pairs, guided without explanation, seated without instruction. The older witches had moved about the space with a calm that did not match the tension in the air. No raised voices, no urgency, just preparation. The Witcher closed his eyes, not to avoid the memory, but to allow it to return as it had been, unchanged. The room had felt smaller then, not because of its size, because of what it held. The boy beside him had spoken once, a question, unanswered, not ignored, simply unnecessary, because some parts of the path did not require understanding, only acceptance. The Witcher withdrew his hand from the table, opened his eyes. The room remained as it was, still, unmoved. He did not linger. There was nothing here to change, only things that had already taken their place in the past. He stepped back into the corridor, closed the door behind him, and continued. Because Kaer Morhen did not hold its lessons in one place, they were scattered, layered, waiting to be found again, in rooms, in paths, in moments that seemed ordinary until they were not. And the deeper one walked into the keep, the more those moments returned, not as echoes, but as something closer, something that had never fully left. There had been a night when the keep did not sleep, not because of danger, not because of any alarm, but because of a lesson that did not belong to daylight. The Witcher remembered it clearly. The air had been still, the sky clouded just enough to dim the stars, leaving the courtyard in a muted grey. No snow fell, yet the ground held a thin, frozen layer that reflected what little light there was. They had been woken without warning, not by voice, by presence, a door opening, a pause, then footsteps retreating. That had been enough. The boys had learned to follow such signals. They gathered in silence, moving through the halls with the kind of caution that comes not from fear, but from uncertainty. No one spoke. No one needed to. Outside, the courtyard waited, and at its center stood a single lantern. Its flame moved gently, steady despite the cold. Vesemir stood beside it. He did not greet them. He did not explain. He simply turned, lifted the lantern, and began to walk. This time, no one hesitated. They followed, through the gate, into the night. The path was darker than before. The mountain, stripped of the soft reflection of snow, revealed its harsher shape. Rocks rose unevenly, shadows stretching between them, creating passages that seemed to shift as the lantern moved. The Witcher walked near the middle of the group, close enough to see the light, far enough to notice what lay beyond it, because the light did not reach everything. And what remained outside, it mattered. They walked for some time, not upward, not downward, but across the mountain's face, along a narrow stretch where the path bent and curved without pattern. Then Vesemir stopped. He placed the lantern on a flat stone, stepped back, and looked at them. "You see with your eyes," he said. A pause. "You survive with something else." He gestured toward the lantern. "Leave it." No one moved. "Now." The command was quiet, but firm. The first boy stepped forward, then another. One by one, they passed the lantern, into the dark. The Witcher felt the shift immediately, not in sight, but in perception. Without the lantern, the world did not disappear. It changed, shapes softened, edges blurred. The path became something to feel rather than see. He slowed his steps, not out of caution, out of adjustment. The ground beneath his feet offered information, subtle changes in texture, in incline, in resistance. The air moved differently in open spaces than it did near rock. There were patterns, not visible, but present. Ahead, one of the boys moved too quickly. His foot struck something unseen. He stumbled, caught himself, continued. No sound followed, no correction. The lesson was not about avoiding mistakes. It was about recognizing them before they happened. The Witcher extended his hand slightly, brushing his fingers along the air in front of him. Not searching, sensing. There, a difference. A shift in the way the air moved. He adjusted his step, avoided the uneven stone beneath, continued. Time passed without measure. The group spread out slightly, each moving at their own pace, guided not by sight but by something quieter. The mountain did not resist. It observed. At some point, the Witcher realized he could no longer see the others, not clearly, only the faint suggestion of movement. And then not even that. He was alone. Or rather, he moved as though he was. The path narrowed, turned, descended slightly. He followed it without question, because questioning required certainty. And certainty had no place here. He reached a point where the ground leveled. The air changed again, more open, less confined. He stopped, not because he had been told to, because something had shifted. The wind. It carried a different sound now, faint, but distinct. Water, moving slowly. He turned toward it, walked, carefully. The ground softened slightly beneath his steps, the frozen surface giving way to something less rigid. Then he saw it. A narrow stream, partially hidden between rocks, its surface dark beneath the night sky. The water moved steadily, its sound consistent, unbroken. He crouched, placed his hand near it, not touching, feeling. The air above it was different, colder, sharper. He followed the stream's edge, not because he knew where it led, because it led somewhere. And in the absence of sight, direction mattered more than destination. After some time, the ground began to rise again, gradually, then more clearly. The Witcher followed, upward, until the familiar shape of the keep began to emerge against the sky, faint, but unmistakable. He reached the gate alone, or so it seemed. Inside, the courtyard held its stillness once more. The lantern was gone. Vesemir stood where he had before, waiting. Others began to appear one by one from different directions, some slower, some uncertain. But they arrived. Eventually. The Witcher stepped forward, not to speak, to stand. Among them. Vesemir looked at each of them in turn, no expression, no judgment. "You do not need light to see," he said. A pause. "You need to understand what you are looking for." He turned and walked back into the keep. The lesson ended, without conclusion, as most did. The Witcher remained in the courtyard for a moment longer. The sky above had shifted slightly, the clouds parting just enough to reveal a faint scattering of stars. Not many, but enough. He looked at them briefly, then lowered his gaze. Because the mountain had shown him something that night. Not hidden, not revealed, simply present. The kind of knowledge that does not stay in the mind, but settles somewhere deeper and waits until it is needed again. There had been a day when the gates of Kaer Morhen opened not for departure, but for return. It was rare, not because travelers avoided the keep, but because few ever found their way to it. The Witcher remembered the sound before he saw the figure. A slow, uneven rhythm against the stone path. Not the steady step of someone accustomed to the mountain. Something heavier, measured, deliberate. He had been in the courtyard at the time, practicing alone with a dulled blade, repeating movements that had already been corrected many times before. The sound drew his attention. He lowered the blade, listened, then turned toward the gate. The figure appeared slowly, framed by the broken arch. Wrapped in a cloak that had once been thick enough to withstand the cold, though now it bore the marks of long travel, frayed edges, patches stitched without care for appearance, only for function. The man paused just inside the gate, not out of hesitation, out of awareness. His eyes moved across the courtyard, taking in the space without urgency. Vesemir stepped forward. No greeting was exchanged, no name spoken, only a slight nod. The man returned it. Then he entered. The Witcher watched from where he stood, not approaching, not retreating, observing. The man moved with a kind of restraint, as though each step had been considered before it was taken. His hand rested near his side, close to the hilt of a blade that remained sheathed. Not defensive, habitual. He was not a Witcher, that much was clear. But he was not unfamiliar with danger. Vesemir led him toward the central hall. The door closed behind them. The courtyard returned to its stillness. The Witcher resumed his practice, though his attention remained divided. Because the arrival of a stranger was not a lesson they had been given before. Time passed, not long, but enough. The door opened again. Vesemir stepped out, alone. He looked toward the Witcher. "Come." The word was quiet, but it carried. The Witcher set the blade aside, followed. Inside, the hall felt different, not changed, adjusted. The man sat at the long table, his cloak folded beside him. His face was marked by lines that spoke not of age alone, but of distance traveled and time spent without rest. He looked up as the Witcher entered. His gaze lingered for a moment, then shifted to Vesemir. "This one?" the man asked. Vesemir gave a slight nod. The man leaned back slightly, studied the Witcher again, not with judgment, with interest. "You've been on the paths," he said. It was not a question. The Witcher did not respond. There was nothing to confirm, nothing to deny. The man reached into his cloak, produced a small object, wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table, unfolded it slowly. Inside there was a fragment of something. Dark, uneven. Stone, perhaps, but not shaped by natural means. It held an edge that did not belong to its form. The Witcher stepped closer, not touching, observing. The air around it felt different. Not cold, not warm, just altered. "You found this?" Vesemir asked. The man nodded. "Near the lower ridges. Where the old paths cross." He paused. "It wasn't there before." The Witcher looked at the fragment again. There was no movement, no sound. Yet something about it suggested that it did not belong. Not in the way a misplaced object feels out of place, in the way something foreign settles into a space that cannot hold it properly. "What did you see?" Vesemir asked. The man's expression shifted slightly. Not fear, something quieter. "I didn't see it," he said. A pause. "I noticed what wasn't there." The Witcher remained still, listening. "The wind stopped," the man continued, "just for a moment." He looked toward the fragment, and the ground felt wrong. Not unstable, not broken, just wrong. Vesemir said nothing. He did not reach for the object. He did not question further. He simply observed, as the Witcher had been taught to do. The man folded the cloth again, covered the fragment, left it on the table. "I thought it best to bring it here," he said. Vesemir nodded. "You were right. No further explanation was given. None was needed." The man stood, reclaimed his cloak. "And the path back?" he asked. Vesemir looked toward the door. "It remains." That was all. The man inclined his head slightly, then turned and left. The door closed behind him. The hall returned to its quiet state. The Witcher remained where he stood, his gaze resting on the cloth-wrapped fragment. Vesemir moved toward it, placed a hand beside it, not touching, feeling. "Not everything that appears is meant to be seen," he said. The Witcher looked up. "Then how do you find it?" he asked. Vesemir's expression did not change. "You don't," he said. A pause. "You notice what's missing." He took the cloth, lifted the fragment, turned toward the far end of the hall. "Come." The Witcher followed, not asking, because the lesson had already begun, and this time it had not come from the mountain, but from something that had found its way through it, and left behind a trace, subtle, uncertain, but enough to be followed, if one knew what to look for, or more importantly, what should have been there, and was not. Vesemir did not take the fragment to any place the Witcher expected, not to the lower chambers, not to the workrooms where tools and substances were kept with careful order. Instead, he moved along a narrower corridor, one that curved slightly as it descended, the stone underfoot worn in a way that suggested fewer steps had passed there over the years. The air changed as they went, not colder, but more still, as though the keep itself held its breath in that direction. At the end of the corridor there was no door, only an opening, framed by stone that had been shaped with purpose rather than repair. Vesemir stepped through. The Witcher followed. The chamber beyond was unlike the others. There were no shelves, no tools, no signs of recent use. Only a wide open space, its walls marked by faint etchings that had softened with time. The floor was uneven, not from damage but from design, shallow grooves forming patterns that were not immediately clear. Vesemir walked to the center, stopped, and placed the wrapped fragment on the ground. He did not uncover it. Not yet. The Witcher remained near the edge of the chamber, watching, waiting. "Stand here," Vesemir said, gesturing to a point along the outer edge of the grooves. The Witcher moved to it. The stone beneath his boots felt no different from the rest, yet there was a sense of placement, as though each position within the chamber held a purpose not easily seen. Vesemir stepped back from the fragment, looked at the space around it, not with focus, with awareness. "Tell me what you notice," he said. The Witcher did not answer immediately. He let the room settle. The faint lines along the floor, the stillness in the air, the absence of sound. Then, "There's no movement," he said. Vesemir gave a slight nod. "Continue." The Witcher shifted his attention toward the edges of the chamber, toward the opening behind them, toward the space where the fragment rested. "There should be," he added. A pause. "Even here." Vesemir's gaze moved briefly to the fragment, then back. "What kind?" he asked. The Witcher considered, not searching for the right word. Allowing the answer to form. "Air," he said, "the way it moves." Another pause. "It stops near it." Vesemir stepped forward, kneeled beside the fragment, unwrapped the cloth. The dark piece of stone revealed itself once more, unchanged, unmoving. Yet the space around it seemed narrower, not visibly, but in presence. "Come closer," Vesemir said. The Witcher did, slowly, each step measured, not from caution, from attention. He stopped a short distance from the fragment. The air felt different here, not heavier, but interrupted, as though something had been placed where a natural flow once existed. He extended his hand slightly, not touching, just feeling. There it was, a boundary, not defined by sight, but by absence. The movement of air did not pass through that space as it should. It bent around it, avoided it, without reason, or perhaps with one that had yet to be understood. Vesemir rose. "The mountain does not create this," he said. The Witcher nodded. It did not feel like the mountain. It felt imposed. "Then what does?" he asked. Vesemir did not answer. Instead, he stepped back once more, leaving the fragment where it lay. "Watch," he said. And then he moved toward the edge of the chamber, to another position along the faint grooves. The Witcher remained where he was, eyes on the fragment. The room held its stillness, until something shifted. Not the fragment, not the stone, the space. The absence moved, slightly, barely enough to notice. But it did. The Witcher adjusted his stance, followed the shift with his gaze. It was not random, it followed the lines along the floor, the shallow grooves, as though something unseen traced them. Not quickly, not with intent, simply moving along a path. He looked toward Vesemir. The old Witcher was watching him, not the fragment, him. "Do you see it?" Vesemir asked. The Witcher nodded. "It follows something." "The ground," Vesemir said, "the shape beneath it." The Witcher glanced down. At the grooves, then back to the fragment. The absence shifted again, continuing along the pattern. "What is it?" he asked. Vesemir's expression remained unchanged. "A mistake," he said. The same word as before, but different now, because this one did not belong to a blade or to a strike. It belonged to something that should not have been placed here, something that altered what already existed, without force, without sound. The Witcher stepped back, not from fear, from understanding. Because the fragment was not dangerous in the way he had been taught to expect. It did not attack, it did not move with purpose, it simply changed what was around it, subtly, quietly, enough to go unnoticed, unless one had learned to look for what was missing. Vesemir moved toward the fragment once more, wrapped it again in cloth, lifted it from the ground. The shift in the air settled, the movement returned, faint but present. The room felt restored, not entirely, but enough. Vesemir turned toward the opening. "We will take it further," he said. The Witcher followed, leaving the chamber behind. The corridor felt different now, not changed, but clearer, as though something that had been slightly out of place had been set aside. They walked in silence, back through the halls, past the rooms that held their own memories, until they reached the far end of the keep, where the walls opened once more to the mountain. The sky had darkened. The first signs of night settling over the ridges. Vesemir paused at the threshold, looked out, then at the fragment in his hand. "Some things," he said, "are not meant to remain where they are found." The Witcher stood beside him. The wind moved gently across the stone, uninterrupted, as it should. He understood now, not fully, but enough, because the lesson was not about the fragment itself. It was about what it revealed, not in presence, but in absence. And the quiet ways the world changes when something does not belong. Even if no one notices at first, even if it takes time, even if it takes someone willing to look closely enough to see what is no longer there and follow that instead. They did not carry the fragment far, not beyond the mountain, not into the valleys below, only to a place where the stone itself felt older, less shaped by hands, less influenced by the quiet order of the keep. A narrow ledge extended along the outer wall, partially hidden by a curve in the rock. From there the land fell away in a long, gradual descent, broken by scattered formations that had stood long before Kaer Morhen had been built. Vesemir stopped there. The wind moved more freely in this place, tracing the edges of the cliff, passing between stone and sky without interruption. He unwrapped the fragment once more, held it for a moment, not examining it, not weighing it, simply allowing it to be what it was. The Witcher stood a short distance away, watching. The fragment looked no different in the fading light, dark, unremarkable, yet its presence still carried that subtle disruption, that quiet misalignment with everything around it. Vesemir stepped forward, placed it gently on the ground, not at the center of the ledge, not in any marked position, just there. Then he stepped back. They waited. No words, no movement, only the steady passage of wind. For a time, nothing changed. The fragment remained as it had been, still, unresponsive. But the air, the Witcher noticed it first, not because it returned, because it hesitated, just for a moment, as though deciding how to move around something it did not recognize. Then it continued. The interruption remained. But it was different here, less confined, less noticeable. The mountain did not adjust itself. It simply continued. Vesemir turned away. "That is enough," he said. The Witcher looked at him, then back at the fragment. "You're leaving it?" he asked. Vesemir nodded. "It will not remain where it is not understood." The Witcher did not question the words, not because they were clear, but because they were not meant to be. Some lessons were not given in answers. They were left to settle, to be carried, to be recognized again in other forms, at other times. They returned to the keep without looking back. The path felt different beneath their feet, not changed, but familiar in a quieter way. The kind of familiarity that does not come from repetition, but from attention. Inside, the halls held their stillness as they always had. The rooms, the corridors, the worn stone beneath each step. Nothing had shifted, and yet something had. The Witcher moved through the space with a slower awareness, noticing the subtle movement of air through the narrow windows, the faint sounds that passed unnoticed before. A distant creak, a slight change in light along the wall, the presence of things that had always been there, waiting to be seen. He returned to the central hall, sat for a moment at the long table, not to rest, to remain. The memory of the fragment did not linger as a single image. It dispersed into understanding, into the quiet realization that not all dangers arrive with force. Some appear as absence, as something missing, as a small shift in what should have been constant. He rose after a time, moved toward the corridor once more, not toward any particular room, just walking. The keep did not guide him, it did not need to. He had begun to understand how to move within it, not by direction, by awareness. Outside, the night had settled fully. The sky stretched wide above the mountains, stars faint but steady where the clouds had cleared. The wind moved along the walls, across the courtyard, through the broken gate, uninterrupted, as it should. Somewhere beyond the keep, the fragment remained, placed among stone that did not question its presence, left where it would either settle or not. The Witcher paused near the doorway. looked out across the courtyard. Nothing moved, nothing called. And yet, the mountain was not empty. It never had been. It held paths unseen, places untouched, moments waiting quietly for those who would pass through them. Not all would notice, not all needed to. He stepped outside. The cold met him without resistance, familiar, steady. The ground beneath his boots held firm. The air moved freely. Nothing missing, nothing altered. For now. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the keep. Because the lessons of Kaer Morhen were not bound to a single place. They did not end when the path was walked, or when the fragment was set aside. They remained. In the way a man listened, in the way he moved, in the way he noticed what others passed without thought. And somewhere far beyond the walls, the mountain continued as it always had, unchanged, watching, not with intent, but with presence, the kind that does not demand attention, only recognition, when the time comes. And if it does not, it remains just the same.